Welcome to the EZCODE Projects Series toaster video number 4. In this video, we'll automate our toaster to process a fixed list of orders. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects Toaster Series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's continue. Just a wonderful reminder that all you have to do is type as I do. Just pause the video or slow down the speed when needed to catch up. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Okay, let's open our VS Code and toaster project. So open not the Finder, open VS Code, and then we'll go to the Explorer tab and we'll open our folder and we'll find wherever you keep your EZCODE projects. Here's our toaster. That's what we want to open. And here we go. We have a bunch of things going on here. I'm just going to close these out. Just for now, open the code.js file. So let's always keep things simple. We want to process a list of toast orders. So let's start with the list. So near the top of the code.js file, create a constant named orders. Okay, so we're just going to come up here. Let's go all the way to the top. We'll do it right here, and that's const. And let's capitalize it. And boom, that's all we have to do. Now we have orders. It's created. It doesn't have a value, but that's okay. So the list will be an array of objects. Okay, right away, you hear list, an array of objects. Boom, we just created an array, and it's a list of objects. So there's an object, comma, here's another object. So for now, we're just going to open up the first object, just like, actually, let's go back again, and let's just put it on a line like this. I'm going to put a semicolon and give a little space. So if you want to add yours just like this, and then we're going to open this up because we're going to copy paste whatever's in the first one here. Because this is orders, plural. There's going to be a lot of them. So let's make one and we'll copy paste them. So arrays of objects is the most fundamental intersection of any programming language. So get used to what this is here. You may make them differently in different languages, but it's the same thing. This is a key value pair and it's in a list. So we can iterate over the list very quickly and we can look at each item that's in it, or in this case, an object. So it's how we process almost everything. In JavaScript, we can easily create objects by just adding a pair of curly braces, just like I had shown. And we just created an array of one object. And if I go on down here and I do that again, now we have two objects. But like I said, we're going to wait on that for a second. So look how easy it is in JavaScript. Now let's add a property to each object that describes the toast intensity. So this would be, now that we're making an order, we need to know, let's say each one of these orders represents one or more people. And people come in and they say, I'd like my toast medium, let's say. And medium would be, let's say, the middle value of our settings, which remember our settings are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so let's say we need to put a value here. So let's just type a property. There's our key value and our actual value. It gets a little wordy because it's value and then a value and then a value. Don't worry about that. We're just trying to be generic with our keys because an order doesn't really need to know that it's a setting in a toaster. It just needs to know it holds a value. And that value in this case is 3. And so let's say now we can just copy paste this, but we need a comma after each item in an array. And let's give another order. It doesn't like that. And we'll just find this one and say this one's 1. And then comma and paste it again. And this one, let's just say, is 5. So let's just move this over a little bit. There we go. We're all lined up here. So we have an order, value 3. Order, value 1, order, value 5. We have 3 different ones in here. Now we need to process the orders one at a time and offer them to our toaster somehow. So here we go. We have this ready to go. We have our orders ready. So let's use our onLoad function. So that's this value right here. There's our load function. So we're going to be right here in the load function now. And what do we got to do? Well, let's see. We don't need any of this anymore. So let's go ahead and clear this out. So inside the load function. So all we have now is a set of open curly braces. And how do we call the orders? Remember, it's the const. We called it orders. It's already an array, which means we have dot notation on the array class, and it has lots of helping methods that we can do and iterate. It'll run these over each one of the elements inside the array. So we don't need to return anything, or we would use map, which in many languages is the same thing. Map will usually send back a new array with your changed items. We don't need to send anything back. We just need to iterate over them. And that's what for each is. For each, like this. And that's just a function. And the first argument of this function on a for each, on most functions of arrays, the first item in here is a method. And so we just open up an arrow method, or we could say function like this, and then we would have the item of the array, the index of the array, and the array itself. Always, this is how it works with most of the methods that are with the array. But we can just do this instead. We can say order, and I don't need those for if there's only one item. So we're going to use an array bracket, and then this is how I make my arrays. I do order for each, and then right after the greater than symbol, we're just going to return, curly braces, return. And now we have a nice little fit, orders for each order. Again, we can call the item whatever it is. We're going to call it order. This is what working with plural words and then singular works out really well, because we can say orders for each order, and it just reads nice. And now, instead of the user being in the HTML hitting the toggle button, we can just say toggle order. And you might say, how can we do that? And while we're at it, I'm just going to put the semicolon here, because toggle doesn't accept a value. And this is where we'd have to come in and say, okay, well, now let's make toggle accept a value. So on our load function, it's going to run through our orders. It's going to say for each order, toggle order, as in send this now to this method. Once again, this method, you can think of this parentheses right here kind of like an array, because they are in order. I can pass in as many items as I want here. I'm only passing in one. If I had these three things listed here, it's still not going to break. So which one would be order? The first one. And then if I had something here in the second one, oops, right here, and I said butter, which one's going to be butter? Number 2 is. 2 is going to be butter. So if I reference 2 down here, and I said, is 2 equal to butter? It would be. Just because the names are different. The context, because of the context. Because this context, not this butter right here, but what we're passing in can become something else. Now we might use the word order again here. I'm not saying that we won't. But I just want to make sure that you know the distinction, that they're different. Because they have their own context. And it's an order-based context for arguments to functions. So here we're going to do something like this. We could just take the order coming in which case we would come down here and say, and what is the order, by the way? These values right here, they're settings, if you remember. So the setting value isn't needed anymore. Now we need to say, because we're not looking at what the user is clicking. The user isn't clicking anymore. We're automating it. So it would be order value. So we're placing the setting into the order, and we're saying, passing it in this way, and then we're saying order value. Now we're just going to look here real quick. I don't see any other use of setting value in here. And I just wanted to show you, this is the object, which is this piece coming in. And when it's like that, we can deconstruct. So in JavaScript, it's called deconstruct this object. And instead, we can just call value instead of doing this longhand right here. And to do that, all we have to do is put two curly braces, which it knows, okay, my first argument is an object, and it must have a property value. So this is an easy way of just saying, look, we just want the value property, because this object might come in with, 1, 2, and you know what? We don't really need all that. We don't want to confuse anybody with it, so we're not actually putting that on there. But just to show, we can just select one property and then use it inside the function. So we wouldn't have order value. We're just going to have value. So that's nice and neat and terse. We can get right to the point. Give me the value. I know you're passing in an object. Give me the value. And then we're just going to multiply that by the heater base time to get our intensity. And then our intensity gets passed into the toaster. Nothing new here. We don't have to change anything else here. So let's see what else we got to do here. We cleared out everything in the function. We added our orders for each, and then our toggle and our intensity. So now what do we have to do? Well, now that we're setting the order based on this value, we have to say that we're going to manually toggle the levers, which we're not doing right now, right? The user is the initial one that toggles the lever down, and then we toggle the lever back up again. So it's going to be the same thing with the setting value and the lever value. So down here where we set the heat, we also need to do, we have to put the setting value is equal to value that we're passing in. So our setting value is the lever. Remember, setting itself, if I scroll up here, setting is the actual DOM element. So when we talk to the DOM element, the DOM's going to update the lever position for us. So we're just going to say setting value is the value coming in of the order, and the lever value is always going to be 0, which is going to initiate the lever down, and then we're going to pop it back up again. Now we don't have to, currently we don't have to set what the setting value is going to be. We can just leave it because the next order to come in is going to reset it whatever value it wants to be at. And so we don't have to have a default position for that, but we could put in a default position for the setting to return it back to something. But we're going to skip that for now. So notice that we're using the passed in and deconstructed value for our orders object, from our order object right there. We also now have to manually set both the setting lever and the toaster lever. So we did that, and we got to save our work and load the view HTML in the browser. So remember, we have our icon up here that says you need to make saves. We can go to File, Save, or we can look at that shortcut right there, Command S. Command S is the way to go because you can save over and over again quickly. Now let's just scroll over here, and we're going to open up our browser. And what else are we going to do here? We're going to say File, Open File. Again, I don't know if you saw that shortcut, but there was Command O to open that up as well. And this is not the right directory here. So here's our view HTML, and we're going to open it up, and there's our toaster. And we can see something's going on. So it looks like our automation works, and we do get all three toast, but the toaster only filed once. So let's just open up this console and question ourselves here and say, I don't have any errors. I can see that we do have toast, and if I do this again, let's see what happens. I did see the heaters come on, and then it's 1, 2, 3. It keeps going. And it looks like the heater elements are coming on, but only once. Or did they come on more than once? So when the orders for each loop runs, it does not wait for each set timeout. So remember, we're taking the set timeout. We're taking the setting value, which might be 3, and we're multiplying by the base time to get 3,000. So that's 3,000 milliseconds or 3 seconds. So what JavaScript does, and what it does very well, is it'll run through every one of them. It will not wait for each one of them. It'll run 3 set timeouts instantly. And so it just keeps rewriting over what's there. So for each set timeout to finish before sending the next order to the toggle method, it just, boom, runs through all of them. So if we can send all of them in under a millisecond, or if it can, it will. It doesn't wait for the set timeout to complete, even though each set timeout will complete. So what we are seeing is the end result of our last order. And just to test this out, let's go back to our code.js file and change the last order value to a 2. So if you went back over here, we went back up here, and we said, okay, the last one's going to be a 2. Let's try that one. Save work. Come back over here, refresh the browser. Notice that the setting notch ends now at 2. So you can see 2 here. Remember, it went through real quick. It went through 3, 1, and then 2. So our toaster is incapable of running in parallel. It must process toast orders in series only. So let's fix the timing issue. Also note that we broke the toggle function for manual lever activations. So if I went in here and I said this, you can see cannot deconstruct property value of undefined as it is undefined. Of course it is. We don't pass anything in during this moment, so this is the part we're going to have to fix as well. So let's head back to the code.js file and figure this out. So we'll just go back over here. So let's fix the lever first so that we can either automate or still press the lever. So let's create a new function called process. Okay. So let's just go in here and we'll do it right underneath toggle function process. There we go. And what do we got to do? Open up parentheses. In this case, we already know to expect an argument of, we're going to call it list, just to be generic. And what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over the list. And another way to iterate over an array or an object is we can use a for loop. Very common. And this is, you can memorize, this is how most of the time it's going to go. So the first part of a for loop is we're going to describe what's called an index, and we're going to set that index to 0. So we're saying, hey, we're going to have a variable. It's going to change over time. That's why we're using let instead of const. And we're going to say this is starting at 0, and then we have a semicolon to stop there. Now the index itself, which will start at 0, if that's less than the list length, so the list length, if it has 3 items, then it's going to be list length is going to equal 3. But remember, indexes are 0 based. So the indexes of those 3 items are going to be 0, 1, and 2. So we know we're still in the array if the index is less than the list length, because if it's a 2, we know we're in there. But once it's 3, it's no longer less than, in which case this for loop will not break in any further. Semicolon, and all we're going to do is bump the index. So we're going to use an operator here that increments the 0 for us. So index, first time it runs, it'll be 0. Yes, it's 0, it breaks in, and then it's going to get bumped to 1 and 2 and so on. So for loop opens up, curly braces, just like any other time. We're going to make a const here and call it an order. It's going to equal list index, and this is how we get the item of the index, semicolon. Now that's each order, and then const, we're going to do, let's see, what we're going to do now is let's move some of our stuff out. So let's make sure this is all still the same. we can just delete here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to grab the toggle. We're going to grab everything in the toggle right now, and we're going to just rip it out, put it right here underneath. So you can see you have intensity here, and then we have, let's move a few things up here. We're just going to move these up now. So setting value, lever value, heat value, let's just put them here, a little blank line. And right when I'm done, just pause, and you'll be able to see everything on here. So let's see lever value, toasted, and clear timeout. So I'm just going to get rid of these bottom spaces. Now we have the process, the order comes in. We're not passing in the value here now. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to process the order from the list. So instead, we're just going to make it order dot value. So not value anymore, like we changed before. We're going to take the order out, which should be one of these items here, or as you're going to see, it's going to be the input value, which you remember was setting dot value. So this looks pretty good right now. Let's see, the only last thing we got to do is right here, the setting value is the order value, order dot value. So the only real changes is we moved these up here, which already existed. We changed this from value to order value, and we changed this to order value as well. Make sure, pause it right now, make sure you have everything right here in this function. And now all we're going to do is we're going to go back down to toggle here in a second. And we're going to say, we're going to remove our value. So let's get rid of that. And we're just going to say the toggle function is now process. And all we have to do is pass in our setting from the DOM. So up here we have setting, if you remember this. To get the value of setting, it's setting.value. So all we have to do is pass this in as one item of an array and kind of like trick our process list here. So to do that, we're just going to go here and we're going to say array, and we're going to pass in the setting. Put a semicolon right there. And the next real quick thing we got to do is one more thing, and it should be, let's see, our load function is going to be different now. So I need to just look this up real quick. Our load now instead is going to be, because we're not going to iterate over each one, we're going to do that in our process method now. And so all we have to do here is we're going to delete this, and we're going to say process orders. Okay, so on the load function, we have process orders. That's it. It's going to go into our new function, which really the only thing that changed was that we're iterating now. And just to trick our one input setting for a manual process, because this toggle method is still associated with the input, we're just going to send the same thing. We're going to say, hey, we have an array, but there's always going to be only one item in the array when we're doing a manual toaster event like this. Okay, so what do we have? Let's see, we have, let me just get back to where I was here. We got the process thing going on. We have the toggle going on, and now all we have to do is refresh, or I'm sorry, save our work. So make sure that icon's gone, and then we're going to go over to the browser, and let's refresh it and see what happens. Okay, we got 3 just like we did before, so our automation hasn't changed. It still works. And let's see if let's go to 5 here and see. We're going to click that, and we do have our manual setting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was a 5-second, and there it goes. Our manual is still working, and our automation is still working. So now we just need to figure out the timing issue. So let's head back to our code.js file. Okay, here we are, and maybe we need another timeout between each loop execution. So let's try that out. We're going to wrap everything inside of the for loop in a new set timeout. So let's just go back here, and we're going to say, all right, well, that's everything inside the curly braces here. So what we can do to make this kind of easy is we can say this is going to be start timer. I don't want the same name as this timer. No collisions there. And we're going to equal a set timeout. And then this is all you do for a set timeout. And we're going to have curly braces, and then it's comma. So you can already see the first argument of set timeout is a callback function. The second argument is the time that we're going to take during the timeout. And for now, let's just do 1,000. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is, now that we have this here, all we have to do is open up these curly braces, and then we're going to go down here, and we're going to select everything underneath it. So your for loop should look like this: process, for loop, set timeout, and then just inside of here, we're going to paste what we took back out again. So we should have nothing changed that's in here right now. Okay, so let's save our work and refresh the browser. All right, so we're just going to save that. Icon has gone away. We're going to go over here. We're going to refresh the browser. All right, yeah, we got one going on, 2, 3. So looks mostly the same, but there is a 1-second pause when we click the lever. So our start timeout is also still working. So let's see. Is that true? 1. Boom. Yep, then it goes. That happened during the automation as well, but it was kind of difficult to see. So let's see, we'll even refresh it and see. 1, then the automation kicks off. So let's return to our code.js file and add one more bit that will help out our timers. Okay, so we're back in here again. The issue we face is that JavaScript is asynchronous. So we think of a clock as synchronous, as in it ticks and talks at the same rate with each second, minute, and hour, happening in the same order every time. Asynchronous would be a clock that can run any second, minute, or hour whenever it wants to. Even each event could take as long as it wanted to. So our process function will run through the for loop without waiting for our timeouts or toaster heater animations. We have a tool in JavaScript that will allow us to wait for each item. It's called a promise, and it's globally available to our EZCODE library, just as document or window is available. So let's add one more code wrapper, but this time around our start timer. So to use a promise, and it looks like a class, if you're familiar with that, we can go in here and say, look, a promise is like this. That's it. It's just a method. It looks exactly like that. It's globally available to us already by the browser. And when we do something like this, there's a couple different ways we can go about doing it. So we usually have to create the new one. So we'll say new promise. And when we do that, there's 2 different ways we can access it. We can do it this way, because we can new promise, and then we can do a then. So it's going to run this method that we pass into it after this is done. So we're not going to do that yet. We're not actually going to use this right now. We're going to use a different way of doing it. And it goes like this. We have to use the word await new promise. And when you do, you can already see, okay, so when we pass into a promise, there's also another automagic function that's in there, and the first argument is the resolve. It's going to give that to us, so don't worry about that. Arrow function, and then again, I'm going to return curly braces return and put a semicolon here. Okay, so yours should look just like this before we do any copy pasting here. And what I want you to note is that, let's make sure I'm going to do this right as well before we head off into our land here. So we're going to put this inside the for loop. We're not going to do that yet. I just wanted you to see that there's a issue here. And when we use await, expressions are only allowed within async functions and at the top levels of modules. So what this means is, let's see if I can get this off. I don't want to view the problem, thank you. Okay. So to do this, when we have an await inside of a function, we have to say that that function is async, and it goes right before the function, just like that. That's it. Now this is an async function, and we can use await inside of it. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and we're going to cut it, and we're going to stick it at the top of our for loop. So just straighten everything up like this, because once again, we're going to break back into this thing, and we're going to take the start timer. So everything starting at the 1000 down there, all the way up to right there. So here, your process method should look like this: for loop, nested promise, and inside the promise, we're going to set our start timer. Okay, now the next thing that we have to do is we don't want the set timeout to happen. We don't want to wait 1,000 or 1 second on the first one. We just immediately want to go. So how do we know that something is the first item in a for loop, or any of these for each, or any of these? By the index. We know index 0 is the first one. So what we can do is do a ternary down here, and the first thing is a condition, so we can just put it in parentheses like this. I'm going to make 2 parentheses, and inside those parentheses I'm going to say if index is equal to 0, and then here's the ternary. So that's just an expression that says, hey, is this true or false? If it's true, question mark, think of it just like a question, then it's going to be 0. Else, and that's what the colon is for, we're going to be 1,000. So this is going to result in 0 or 1,000 being passed into our set timeout. Okay, the last part that we have to influence here is right here. If you can see resolve, that's a method that we get from the promise that's passed in as the first argument to our function, our callback function here, and it needs to go somewhere. So go ahead and copy or type that out, and we're going to put it right below the clear timeout. And what resolve does, with parentheses and a semicolon, what resolve does is once this gets invoked, this function here, we now know to tell the promise we're all done, so complete your await and return. And so that's what the resolve method is there for. It's given to us by the promise, and we want to do it at the last point that we want to do it inside of our larger function here. Okay, so the next piece of this is just to save. So let's go ahead and save our work right here. Boom, save. And we're going to move over here. Make sure you got all that correct. And let's go ahead and we're going to turn that on. There we go. We got our toaster for number 1. We have our toaster for number 2, which was faster, 1 second, and our toaster for the 3rd level there. And just for good measure, let's make sure that's still working. Okay, nice work, everyone. We now have an automated toaster that can process a list of orders. Look how fun it is to automate work. Well, how far can we take this? I mean, what if our 5 orders quickly become 1,000,000 orders of toast? Our toaster would have to complete them one at a time. What if our toaster could replicate itself to complete any number of orders for toast within a specific minimal time? In our next video, we'll go full toaster-nator and create a way to scale our toaster to run orders in parallel. If you enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.